This is lesson 9 of Makharij and Sifaat series. In this lesson, we'll tackle the letter Noon, how to pronounce it properly, and what are the most common mistakes related to it. Noon is another letter pronounced from the edge of the tongue. The edge of the tongue is that highlighted area. So now, how is Noon pronounced? In order to pronounce Noon properly, you need to perform two actions. One action using your tongue, and the other action through your nasal cavity. So let's start with the first one. When pronouncing Noon, the edge of the tongue should be touching and making full contact with the alveolar ridge. So with full contact, I mean that there is no gap between the tongue and the contact area on the alveolar ridge. The alveolar ridge is that bony part behind your front teeth. But where exactly should the edge of the tongue be? Where on the alveolar ridge? Well, positioning the Noon should be lower than the position of Lam, which is something that we discussed last lesson. So, in other words, Noon is closer to the upper front teeth and the outside of the mouth than the position of Lam. It is not the same position as Lam, but it is slightly in front of its Makharij. So first Lam and then Noon. So this first movement represents half of the sound of Noon. The other half is performed through the second action, which is the nasal cavity. All what you have to do is letting air out through your nasal cavity. And this sound coming from the nasal cavity is then called غنة, which then represents the second half of the sound of Noon. An. And in order to make sure that you are getting both movements right, especially the second one, try performing Noon while blocking your nostrils. If the sound is muffled and indistinguishable, then you're performing it correctly. And which means that normally there is air coming out of your nostrils, and now you're blocking it, the sound doesn't come out properly. Here are some examples for Noon in context. ينهون يظنون نون. Now, what are the most common mistakes for Noon? The first mistake is when Noon comes at the end of words, and how much غنة is given to that Noon. The mistake is then either giving too much or too little غنة, which then contributes to how clear the Noon is at the end of the word. If it is too little, it is gonna sound like this. نستعين نستعين. And if it is too much, it is gonna sound like this. ينهون ينهون. While it should be somewhere in between, where you show the Noon and its غنة without extending or exaggerating the sound. نستعين. The next common mistake is performing قلقلة, which happens when Noon is in the middle of the word and it has sukun. This mistake is very common, especially in Surah Al-Fatiha, in this word. أنعمت صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم. Now that is a mistake, and it should sound like this. أنعمت أنعمت. The last mistake is making Noon a full mouth letter when followed by a full mouth letter. Like in this word, for example. نظر نظن. So here the Noon is followed by ظا, a full mouth letter. But the Noon is still an empty mouth letter that should not be full mouth at all, and it should sound like this. نظن نظر. Finally, and as usual, if you heard a common mistake or a certain difficulty about today's letter, let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. If you want to start reading and understanding the Quran in Arabic, then you should start your journey right here. And don't forget to check out my latest book, which goes perfectly with this free course. I'll leave the links for all of them in the description, so check them out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.